Our story begins on the picturesque Jinting Mountain, famously known by many names, in a small pagoda where the great demon Venerable Ji Tiandao's body remained for over a month in a suspended state of meditation. When the consciousness of the former executive Lu Zhou awakened into the decrepit old body, he remained completely still as he listened in on the conversations of his remaining 4 disciples. His third son couldn't stand the righteous individuals who were besieging them at such an inopportune moment. If it wasn't for the words of his 5th sister, he would have been willing to fall into their traps for the opportunity to destroy them all. The group was reassuring themselves that even without the help of their master, they had what it took to repel the forces at their gates. But the 5th sister was again the voice of reason. Could they really take on the heads of the 10 great sects? Lu Zhou had no idea where he was or what was going on. But as he continued to meditate, the memories of a lifetime flooded in. There was no way he had been reincarnated into the great demon Venerable Ji Tiandao. About a month ago, the previous owner of this body had single-handedly defended his mountain from the top 10 masters of the world's most famous righteous sects, only for the battle to end in a draw. And now his enemies were back to attempt to finish what they started. As his memories continued to flood in, he realized that he resided in the body of this world's most treacherous villain. Over the course of Ji Tiandao's life, he managed to rescue 9 disciples. Each villain in their own right was capable of exerting control over entire nations, and wreaking havoc wherever they went. His eldest disciple Yu Zhihai was a deserter. He had defected and formed his own sect known as the First Demonic Sect. Yu Zhihai and his Netherworld sect were feared the world over. Yu Shangrong, his second disciple, was a fearsome sword demon. His current goals were to challenge sword experts the world over, killing anyone who chooses not to oblige him. The lord of the Yanyu Palace, Yi Tianxin, was supported by all female cultivators and was known as the Fairy Shura. Among his 9 disciples, the 7th, Siwuya, reigns as a master of an information network that spans the globe. This cunning and sophisticated villain instigates wars, resulting in immeasurable loss of life and countless injuries, shattering the very fabric of existence. His 8th disciple was known as the Evil King. After leaving the mountain, Xu Honggong was able to earn such a title in only a few short years. Xia Yuaner was his 9th disciple. She was the last to join his sect. Not only was she his favorite disciple, but she was the most loyal among them all. Regardless of what happened, it was said that she alone would remain by her master's side. Essentially, Ji Tiandao had lived a full life. He had squeezed out every bit of the 1,000 years a cultivator had in this realm. As the years passed, the power he had to bind his disciples to him declined. Challenging his authority, 5 of the 9 disciples had put aside their loyalties to make their way into the world. A cough slipped from his lips, alerting his remaining disciples of his current state. He doubted he would be gaining much more than memories when it came to this frail old body. His venomous pupils wasted no time burdening him with the world's problems. His 4th disciple Ming Shurin made sure he knew that the dogs were at their gates, breaking through their defensive barriers as they spoke. 3rd disciple Duan Mushing was ready to go for reinforcements. He was sure if he asked the eldest senior brother he would come to help. Regardless of what may have happened, he was still one of the disciples. And being the leader of a sect of his own would give them the reinforcements they needed. The 5th disciple Zhao Yu had no doubt her 7th junior brother would also rush to their aid. Little Xia Yuana was the only one who showed any signs that she cared about their master's health. Lu Zhou gave himself a pep talk. He had to stay calm. He was the master of all these villains after all. He immediately ordered them to shut up. He had no idea why they were all so anxious. The barriers surrounding their mountain would hold out for a while. He was sure the precious disciples they spoke of, the eldest and the 7th, would have been the first to have attempted to take him out if it wasn't for the barrier that was currently in place. It wasn't as if the rumors of his draw hadn't spread the world over. His memories told him the very villains in front of him were treacherous enough to take him out if they knew he had no cultivation. The righteous ones outside his barrier would not have a need to kill him, as his treacherous snakes would do it for them. He made sure they all knew he was aware of their wishes for him to die early. causing all of them to prostrate themselves before him. Sure, he was in charge only because they were currently in the divine court realm. But in a few years, when they moved into the primordial spirit tribulation realm, they would remove his yoke from their necks and follow in the footsteps of his other disciples. They assured him they would treat their teacher with the same respect as their fathers, promising never to betray his trust. Lu Zhou ordered them to leave as he had his own plans to defeat the enemies. He had no idea what he, a simple office worker, had done in his past life that had put him in the position where he had to clean up the mess the great demon had left behind. What could an old body that struggled to move do when it had enemies at his front and enemies at its back? Ding! It has been detected that the target has completed the task. Take 1,000 years. Inheritance task completed 9 out of 9. The merit system is officially open. This was the exact opportunity Lu Zhou had been hoping for. If he hadn't got a cheat system, it just wouldn't have been fair. Name, Jitian now. Race, human. Cultivation, 9 layers quenched body. Merit points, minus 100,000, can be used to exchange life force, lottery, etc. Remaining life, 3 days. Items, none. Feats, none. Other functions, lottery, mailbox. He had no idea what frightened him more, the minus 100,000 merit points, or only having 3 days of life remaining. Redetecting in progress. Corrected incorrect information, Ji Tian now changed to Lu Zhou. Ding, triggering a pre-task for the main quest, defeating the enemy. Complete the pre-task to correct your body and reset the merit points to 0. The host is detected to be too weak. A newbie gift pack is rewarded. Will you open it? Lu Zhou had no problem understanding why the system released the pre-task. The great demon had a lifetime of evil deeds. But he was shocked at how reasonable this system was for it to know that the body he was in currently wasn't worth much. Being rewarded a newbie gift pack was a nice touch. He screamed the word open the moment he was prompted. Ding, obtained the reverse card, can get a part of your life force back. Even though all of the great demon's body's cultivation was gone, it still retained the effects of the 9 layers quenched body. Obtain 3 peak state cards. Every time you use it you will have precisely 30 minutes of the great demon's peak state. Lu Zhou hoped this meant the great demon's state at its strongest, seeing as how he was capable of forcing a draw in a declining state. Lu Zhou would have no problems cleaning up if he was in peak form. Obtained 5 fatal blocks. The passive effect can block 5 death blows to the host. The most important card he received was the reversal card. With only 3 days of life remaining, he wasted no time using it. The life force that shot forth was like a tornado that could be felt for miles around. The third disciple knew their master had been holding out on them. After being betrayed, he just was never as open as he was before. The fifth disciple knew this couldn't be right. It was clear that their master had no spiritual energy. And with the rumors of him being injured, how was he capable of such a feat? The fourth disciple wasn't surprised. It wasn't like it was impossible to hide your spiritual energy. He had no doubt if their master was capable of putting on such a display. His time was nowhere near its end. The group looked to the master's favorite for any hints that would inform them of what had just happened. But little Nine quickly brushed them off. She had no idea. The old man had always been unpredictable. An annoying pest had grown restless, insisting that the demons come out and die. Such trash wasn't even worthy of being little Nine's opponent. If they hadn't come in such a large force, things could have progressed much easier. The only true dangers were the 10 masters, as each of them had obtained the strength of the primordial spirit tribulation realm. The situation had moved into a critical state. They could only hope their master had what it took to drive their enemies away. And their treacherous behavior finally began to show its head. As the fourth insisted, there was no one to stop them from making a hasty retreat. But the third wouldn't be going anywhere until he received his weapon. Even if the fifth believed it was just some broken trash. Little Nine couldn't believe her senior brothers and sister. Why would they not just choose to fight alongside their master? With all the work their master had put into them, how could they even think of abandoning him? The fifth sister brushed the little one off. Being the youngest, there were many things she wasn't aware of. With their reputation, this was to be expected. They were the 9 great demons after all. All of them had only followed in the footsteps of their master and become villains. Little 9 didn't feel this was an appropriate excuse to betray their master. Lu Zhou got up working the kinks out of the old body. Even with how bad he treated his previous body, he never felt more than 30 years old at most. So being dropped into what he perceived to be no better than a corpse was going to take some time to adapt to. So, it's a good thing that his remaining lifespan had increased to 313 days. His exchange system allowed him to obtain skills, weapons, and various experience cards, and at the moment the most important item, the reversal card, which gave him the ability to reverse his age. Even so, the reward items he received were minor at best. He was going to have to be strategic in their use, if he expected to get out of his current situation. The increased strikes against their dome only meant that the cultivators were starting to become impatient. Jiting Mountain was a true treasure. The mountain was doing everything it could to bolster its defense. It was truly giving all these fools a run for their money. It didn't take long for his 4 brats to reappear before his eyes. Little 9 was amazed. Her master appeared much younger than he had in a long time. He called the little one over, and as soon as she was in range, he showered her with affection. The others couldn't believe the old demon was showing such a gentle side. The display lit a flame inside the 3rd disciple. Even though he was sure to be defeated, he requested to be allowed to fight the master. A single side eye was all it took to defeat the little brat. Lu Zhou was ready to take the battle to the righteous ones outside, ordering them all to follow him to the shield wall as he prepared to engage the enemy. The 10 sects were closing in on their goal of taking out the barrier. The fact that they hadn't been confronted by any forces could only mean the great demon of Jiting Mountain was seriously injured. If they held their own a little longer, they would be able to rid the world of the villainous sect once and for all. As the 10 masters increased their attacks, the old demon showed his face. Lu Zhou stood before the barrier nervous but determined, chastising himself for halting his advance. The master of the Heavenly Sword sect couldn't believe his eyes. In the months since they last met, the old demon was actually becoming younger. After the beating they received less than a month ago, Lu Zhou couldn't believe how bold all these cowards were. The master of the Heavenly Sword sect called down for him to surrender. They all knew the state he was in. The charades he was playing were meaningless. And only through surrendering would he come to no harm. The righteous sect's loudest mouth was very accommodating. He offered the 4 disciples a way out. All they needed to do was repent for their sins and join them in the fight against the old demon. The 4th disciple was tired of the BS and was ready to take it to the enemy. Offering the loudmouth a deal, if he was able to take a single strike from him, he would obediently accept death. Lu Zhou ordered him to stand down. There was no need for the 4th to get involved when his master could handle this on his own. One of the 10 masters called them out for the bullies they were. Everyone knew the 9 great villains of the Jiting Mountains were all above the divine court realm. Only a demon would be caught dead bullying a junior. Good would always be rewarded with good, and evil with evil. The demons had no one to blame for their predicament but themselves. Lu Zhou, as the great demon, reserved the right to make his own judgments. Only he could punish his disciples. It wasn't for anyone else to make that decision. The Heavenly Sword Master laughed. If they waited for him to punish his disciples, the world would be completely destroyed. When his 1st disciple went on a crusade against the other sects, the great demon could care less. You also couldn't be bothered when your 2nd disciple became the biggest thief in known history. He was sure the great demon would continue to deny that it was this very same disciple who robbed the wedding of the Datan dynasty to the princess of the western regions. Lu Zhou wasted no time admitting it. And when questioned further, he had no problem admitting that it was because of Siwuyu's institutions. The master of the Heavenly Sword knew that pupils only became this way when the master was lenient and lazy. Lu Zhou didn't have any sympathy for an outside clan. And for the great sects to be taking pity upon a Western clan could only mean their motives were impure. The Heavenly Sword Master was done arguing. It was time for the demon to drop his pretense and step out of the barrier. In all the years, The fourth disciple had never seen his master willing to have a conversation, let alone argue with his enemies. If things weren't off, the great demon should have quickly taken the battle to his foes. But seeing as how he was willing to waste time, only meant his master was indeed injured. Lu Zhou stepped through the barrier ready to see the force his enemy could bring to bear. The Heavenly Sword Master began to use his sect's most precious ability. The onlookers marveled at the display, knowing there was nothing that could stand in its way. The old demon didn't have anyone to blame but himself when his body was turned to ashes by the flash of the Heavenly Sword. As Lu Zhou stood waiting for the attack, his disciples became nervous. No matter how great their master was, he was willingly walking into a trap, and there was no way he would walk away unscathed. Lu Zhou was planning to use the peak state card the moment it was necessary. More than anything, he had to put his most dangerous enemies, his disciples, in their place. There was no way he was going to put up with their continued disloyalty. Ding, triggered side quests. It's hard to tell what's going on in the mind of others. Let the villains reveal their true colors. He knew there was no way he was being paranoid. He was indeed being attacked from the front and the rear. The build-up of the attack had finished, and the Heavenly Sword Master ordered the demon to die. Little Nine couldn't bear watching the reckless actions of her master, yelling for him to dodge the attack. But Fourth was willing to sit back and see what happened. The third and the fifth weren't having it. There was no way they were going to risk everything they had worked for, launching attacks to protect their master at all costs. He knew the greed of his disciples was going to get the best of them. After all, there was no way a villain would take any chances with their most precious resources. The three attacks collided and slammed into the top of the barrier, causing cracks to splinter outwards. Because of his disciples' reckless actions, the Jinting Mountains barrier wouldn't last much longer. The Heavenly Sword attack hadn't even been strong enough to trigger his fatal block card. He was going to have to do something about his villains. The onlookers knew the great demon wasn't worth much. They couldn't get over how fast he retreated inside his barrier in the face of danger. The 10 masters chuckled to themselves. The authority of the great demon was severely slipping if he couldn't even control his last 4 disciples. Lu Zhou's 3 peak state cards would only last an hour and a half. He decided he had to quickly take care of his treacherous disciples first before he put the enemies down. The fourth continued to give his master unsolicited advice. Lu Zhou had had enough. Before you're capable of resisting a foreign force, you have to shore up your internal problems. He directly confronted the little brats. They were being mighty bold, to force their way into his personal concerns. They promised they were only worried for their master's safety. If they hadn't intervened, he would have fallen into a deadly trap. There was no need for him to continue to pretend. They knew he was injured. The 3 were done with this. It was time for them to take control. They insisted their master give up. As long as he passed on all his skills and weapons to them, they would make sure he remained safe. After all, he would always be their master. Little Nine couldn't believe the boldness of her brothers and sister. All of the great masters looked down their noses at him. After all, he cultivated such disciples. In the end, evil begets evil. Before he proceeded with his plans, he needed to know where Little Nine stood in all of this. Her hesitation only made him insist she lay her feelings bare. She dropped to her knees, for she alone was still his loyal servant. Ding, completed the side quest. It's hard to tell what's going on in the minds of others. Eye of Truth granted. Reward effects are permanent. CI Yuana Divine Court Realm Loyalty 60%, gradually increasing. Ming Shirin, Divine Court Realm Loyalty 15%, gradually decreasing. Duan Mushin Divine Court Realm Loyalty 23%, gradually decreasing. Zhaoyuan Divine Court Realm Loyalty 35%, gradually decreasing. Reminder: once the loyalty reaches 0, they will defect to the other side and become an enemy. If the loyalty reaches 80, they will not defect. If it is 90 or above, you will retain absolute loyalty. He didn't know what to make of the young one's loyalty increasing. But his mind was made up, and he pushed forward. He admitted that he, the great demon, was indeed injured. instantly losing 5 loyalty from 3 of his pupils. He immediately informed them that this fact gave them no right to be disobedient toward their master. Activating one of his 3 peak cards, he wasted no time attacking the insufferable brats, sending them flying as blood sprayed from their mouths. The force of the attack could be felt all around the mountain, as the 3 pupils were tossed about. The moment they could, they prostrated themselves, admitting to their mistakes. Little Nine was the only one to remain in place. She stared on in amazement at her master's peak state. Lu Zhou couldn't believe how great it felt, if only it was permanent. His spiritual energy encircled the mountain, sending a beam of fire spiraling towards the heavens. Jiting Mountain's barrier was shattered in the process. The 10 masters watched the display in disbelief, their armies incapable of processing the pure destructive force before their eyes. They were all sure the old demon was near death. Their time would come, but at the moment his disciples needed discipline. Each of them begged for forgiveness. Their words, "This disciple was wrong, this disciple admits his wrongdoing, and this disciple is guilty," just wasn't going to cut it. Lu Zhou had no choice but to punish them severely. A flick of his pointer finger was all it took to put the trio of villains into their place. The 3 would be fine for now. He would check in on them the moment he was done with the forces arrayed against him. With the time of his peak state card running out, he needed to progress to the main body of this battle. He would focus on the 10 great masters. The fallout of their battle would easily deal with the cultivators that numbered in the tens of thousands. Lu Zhou rose above the mountainside, casting 100 tribulations of the underworld Dharma body. Seeing as how the great demon had used his strongest move, they had no choice but to follow suit. Their army's only chance of surviving was to fall back behind the wall of Dharma bodies. If they could just hold out for a short time, they would easily be able to finish this battle. They had no idea why the great demon had chosen to jump straight to his finishing move, when it was known by all how much chi the ability consumed. There was no point in Lu Zhou playing around, as his trial cards would only last so long. Seeing as how the Heavenly Sword Master was so keen on using swords, Lu Zhou decided he would use them as well. With the tips of 2 of his fingers, he cast Imperfect Heaven's Favor. The move was the Tianyi sword method's strongest technique. Duan Mushing, the 3rd disciple, had spent his life mastering all the Tianyi sword and spear techniques, but his master was never willing to part with the wisdom of the Imperfect Heaven's Favor. He had never expected to see the move being used like this. His disciples couldn't believe how wrong they were. Their master was capable of stacking his ultimate techniques. The Heavenly Sword Sex Master wasn't a fool. He was the first to retreat the moment he believed the great demon was capable of bringing the force of Imperfect Heaven's favor to bear. The move being used in conjunction with the 100 tribulations of the underworld Dharma body would heighten its strength to unparalleled levels. As it was, the great demon wasn't injured at all. More so, his strength had only increased. Barely a month ago, the 10 of them hadn't had any problems bringing the old demon to his knees. The drastic change in the old demon made no sense. Lu Zhou wielded the Imperfect Heaven's favor like a precision instrument, cutting down anyone who wasn't wise enough to retreat. The attack sliced through the mountain range, reshaping its terrain. The 10,000 cultivators were going to be in trouble if they weren't capable of also making a hasty retreat. In the past, he was only capable of using one move at a time, but now he was wielding multiples like it was nothing. The expression on his face was pure calm. Lu Zhou was indeed calm as a cucumber. After all, the trial card was of the zenith level. Energy is replenished immediately upon depletion, was printed on the card. He was surprised that the card had indeed been named appropriately. The wails of the weaker cultivators could be heard all across the battlefield, as they all did what they could to get out of the range of danger. Lu Zhou had a limited supply of cards, so he couldn't waste them. He was going to squeeze out every drop. So, there was no chance he was just going to allow the masters to escape. 1 second he was floating in the air, in the very next moment, he was gone. Their master's use of the divine technique Blink was just too much. The overpowered ability allowed for the user to arrive at their target almost instantly. If it wasn't for its high energy consumption, the ability would make its user a god. Fear coursed through the disciples, causing them to worry for their lives. At this point, they had no choice but to run. His fifth disciple just couldn't understand her master. If he had such power, why did he allow the degradation of their sect? He could have easily destroyed the fools who had marched upon their mountain. With such power, why had he tolerated the treacherous behavior of their older siblings? If it wasn't for Little Nine, they would have made another drastic mistake. She urged them to take her advice and remain seated. She knew they weren't thinking clearly, for how could they escape their master when he possessed such a divine technique? Little Nine strutted around the other disciples as they discussed how wise and conniving old people were. All they could figure was their master was tired of playing the same old game, so he decided to play by new rules. The master of the heavenly swords, divine technique had indeed come in handy. It caused him an astonishing amount of energy. At this point, his ability to make it out safe was all that mattered. The moment he believed he was safe, he sensed the presence behind him. Lu Zhou had started to lose faith that the great master would ever catch up. Lu Zhou was astonished that the heavenly sword master's arrogance had simply evaporated. The great master was worried for the old demon. If he continued to use his abilities like he would simply exhaust himself. He had no idea why he was the one being singled out when there were plenty of other old bastards to chase. But after all, his mouth is what put him in this position. The master had chosen to scoff at the great demon's use of his abilities. The fact that he had chosen to use the 100 tribulations of the underworld Dharma body wasn't special. After all, the great demon only used finishing moves. In the world of cultivation, there are few who can master the 100 tribulations profound Dharma. Those who achieve the 8-leafed golden lotus are even more rare. Moreover, the 8 golden leaves have a tendency to split. Because of this, the 8-leafed golden lotus can become a 9-leafed golden lotus. Then the 9-leafed golden lotus will become 10, and the 10 leaves can condense into 1,000 worlds whirling. The heavenly sword master had only obtained the 7th leaf. And there's a world of difference between that and the 8th. He was also capable of using the heavenly sword flash, the origins of the heavens and one with the heavens. Obtaining such greatness in one's lifetime wasn't half bad. But the old demon, on the other hand, had access to a plethora of unique skills. As the heavenly sword master's death neared, he asked for leniency. Reluctantly, Lu Zhou replied that he couldn't, as his Dharma completed its maneuver, slamming into the earth. Even though he had time left, he didn't feel it was wise to chase after the other 9. He would much rather spend his time disciplining the ones who mattered most to him. Ding, mission completed. Merit value will be cleared. Main mission: to guide and lead the antagonists. Once a teacher, always a father. Those who betray the teacher are treasonous. Those with malicious intentions are even worse than pigs. Instruct your disciples and increase their loyalty. Mission 1. Foster unwavering loyalty in disciples CIU honor, striving to surpass the 80% threshold. Mission 2. Impose just consequences upon the 3 villains for their transgressions. Lu Zhou couldn't believe how stingy the system was. He had repelled thousands of cultivators and didn't receive a single reward. A single peak state card would have been welcomed. Reminder 1. A peak state card is a precious tool provided in consideration of the weak host. Please use them sparingly. Reminder 2. Please work hard to increase the host's strength. Last reminder. Your peak state card duration has ended. Lu Zhou wondered how long it would take to reach the state he was just in, through cultivation alone. In the end, item cards were only tools. He needed to get to the point where he could rely on his strength alone. The 3 villains trembled in anticipation of their punishment. Lu Zhou was going to leave the 3 to stew, calling Xia Yuan to step forward. Her loyalty had increased to 65, but the others were also slowly rising. But still too low at the moment to be useful. Lu Zhou requested Little Nine help him retire, as his old bones had had enough for the day. With her little head held high, she would happily help him back to his pagoda. The moment he left, the bickering began. Duan Mushing, the 3rd disciple, was laying the blame fully at Ming Shirin's foot. He was sure the master had been injured. His analysis was never wrong. But this time they were. Thousands of cultivators lost their lives because of a single miscalculation. Hopefully, between the three of them, they could make the appropriate decision. Because running surely, wasn't it? Lu Zhou's display of strength should have been enough to put an end to such thoughts. Their master had single-handedly forced 10 great masters to retreat, and had shown he was capable of using his ultimate abilities readily without restrictions. The simple truth was, if he had wanted to kill them, they would each be dead. The moment they returned to the isolated pagoda, Little Nine was willing to answer any questions her master threw her way, and the first was how long had she been in residence upon the mountain. It was a strange question, but she had been with the master for 5 years. That old bastard Ji Tian now had simply taken in a bunch of monsters. But pushing forward, he inquired whether Little Nine understood the mistakes she had made. The biggest mistake she had ever made was listening to her brothers. If it wasn't for their coaxing, she would have remained obedient to the master, and the master alone. It was a start, but it wasn't the answer he was looking for. Around New Year's, she left Jinting Mountain to steal ancient books of cultivation from 2 great sects. He was only asking because his memories couldn't come up with a reason for her doing so. Xia Yuana knew right from wrong. But her 4th brother's opinion was that she was a goody two-shoes, and if you weren't on the sinister list, you had no right being a disciple of Jinting Mountain. He racked his brain but couldn't find a single mention of such a list. She could tell her master was clueless, so she explained that there was a ranking list established by cultivators. The list ranked the world's biggest villains. All 8 of her brothers and sisters were in the top 30, but the person who reigned supreme was none other than her master. The lack of teaching from the son falls upon the father, and if the instruction lacks strictness, it reflects the master's laziness. The blame didn't lay with Little Nine, for her master was incapable of teaching her well. As he sat there contemplating the failures of this body, he came to his decision. Yuan, you hold a special place as master's favorite disciple. Henceforth, strive to embrace only goodness and shun all forms of evil. All she could think of doing to repay him for his kindness was to give him a back massage. He couldn't believe the old great demon had raised 8 villains, only to be saddled with a respectful soul in the end. If it wasn't for him being forced into this body, eventually she too would have been corrupted. Her pure soul was easily influenced. Ding! Mission complete. Xia Yuan's loyalty has reached 80%. 100 merit value will be rewarded. Being a former executive, in his past life, gave him insight into a few things. At the top of that list were people. He was sure that the teachings of the master were 100% the reason why Jinting Mountain's disciples were evil. It was time for him to do what he could to reverse the damage, sending Little Nine off to retrieve the other 3. Their loyalties were slowly on the rise. They continued to prostrate themselves, begging for forgiveness. He knew eventually the 3 would be putty in his hands. The 5th disciple, Zhao Yu, addressed the master, expressing deep remorse. It was all because she was confused. Betraying her master never crossed her mind, not once since the day she entered the Jinting Mountain gates. She humbly begged for her master's forgiveness. Master, I, your devoted disciple, have faithfully served for 100 years. The 3rd disciple, Duan Mushing, displayed unwavering dedication even without seeking recognition. He implored his master to recall their long companionship and show mercy by sparing his life. For 60 years, Ming Shirin, the 4th disciple, had remained steadfast, never entertaining the thought of disobeying his master. However, a moment of confusion led to a grave mistake. He earnestly pleaded for his master's mercy and clemency. Lu Zhou stood with his back to the 3, hair blowing in the wind. He asked his 3rd disciple to tell him his place on the sinister list. He had reached the 18th rank. Next, he inquired about Ming Shirin's position. But seeing as how he was not as good as his senior brother, he was only ranked 25th. Without being asked, Zhao Yu spoke up, admitting she was fortunate to be 28th on the list. He expressed his confusion, admitting that he didn't grasp where he had made a mistake. He couldn't comprehend why they ever thought that being ranked on a list was something he could ever take pride in. The disappointment on their master's face was evident, signifying that they had lost the approval and respect they had once had. Even with being number one on the list, he decided to accept this and move on. He knew the three understood right from wrong, and wished for them to change. They looked on, not understanding where their master was going with this. Only for him to inform them that from this day forward they would refrain from doing evil. Inquiring whether they believed it was something they could accomplish. All three sat straight up with obvious deadpan expressions. The four of them in unison agreed to obey their master's wish. He admitted to not being the best master, only ever focusing on cultivation and never teaching them how to conduct themselves. Because of his wrongdoing, he created a bunch of treacherous disciples. First up for punishment was the third and the fourth disciples. They were all currently vulnerable to outside attacks, so until the Jinting Mountain shield was repaired, both of them were ordered to protect their domain and remain on the mountainside at all times. Repairing such a shield wasn't an easy task. The disciples were essentially losing their freedom as the repairs wouldn't be done for at least 8 to 10 years. In his opinion, the punishment was absolutely reasonable. But on the bright side, once the repairs were completed, their sins would be forgiven. Unbelieving of their luck, smiles spread across their faces as they agreed to obey their master's orders. Lu Zhou turned his attention to Zhao Yu. Since he had the two senior brothers protecting the mountain, he decided it would be best for her to atone for her crimes off the mountain. Even as she was agreeing to obey her master, she had no idea what she was atoning for. Seeing this, he ordered her to speak up. She clearly stated she had no idea of the crime she committed. Lu Zhou was thankful for the honesty of his fifth disciple. He knew the villains had no way to decipher right from wrong. After all, being evil was ingrained into their very being. He turned to Little Nyan to help clarify good and evil. From her viewpoint, it was as simple as helping and harming others. So, he would get a good idea of where each stood. He went down the list. Next up was the third disciple, who believed charitable deeds were inherently good. An evil deed consisted of burning, looting, and plundering. Next up was the fourth, unsure of the right answer. Ming Shirin stated that serving one's country and people was good, and doing villainy things with his friends were bad. So far, none of them had come anywhere close to the answers he was looking for. They were all being way too specific. In life, there is no obligation to perform good deeds or dedicate oneself solely to serving the country and its people. Pleasing everyone is an impossible task, yet it's crucial not to carry any guilt within one's heart. None of them could fathom the profound transformation in their master. Just a month ago, the great demon had been a ruthless, cunning figure, instructing them to eliminate anyone who failed to meet their approval. Yet, the person standing before them now was uttering such insightful and considerate comments. Lu Zhou's words cut deep within Zhao Yu. She was starting to understand her master's thoughts and beliefs. She was going to go out and kill all those fanatics who dared insult her master. Everyone present levied their side-eye in her direction. His passionate words hadn't reached the fifth disciple at all, causing him to fully reevaluate his plans for her. She, too, would remain on the mountain and receive her punishment with the others. It was too much for them to grasp the concept of good and evil in such a short time. He had his work cut out for him as their loyalty still was lagging some ways under 60%. All he'd done so far wasn't enough. He was going to need to push harder. If he expected them to start fresh, they needed absolution from their past wrongdoings. Lu Zhou made it clear that he would forgive their past transgressions and let bygones be bygones. However, if they were to venture into dangerous paths once more, they would face the full force of his wrath. This pushed each of their loyalty up by 5%. All he needed to do was push just a little more. So, he pulled out the big guns, assuring them as their master, he would always protect them. The declaration stunned the four, before causing their loyalties to shoot through the roof. Ding, you've completed the task of punishing the 3 villainous disciples. You are rewarded with 100 merit points. Lu Zhou had reached the goals he had set out to accomplish. Seeing no need to have the 4 in his presence, he dismissed the group. None of them needed to be asked twice. They vanished as fast as they could. He could hear their conversation on the wind as they went. They couldn't believe their luck. If this was the past, they would each have received a brutal beating. He watched the four disappear over the mountainside as he turned his attention to his system. Experiencing this body's peak state was a double-edged sword. Unlike before, he truly understood how weak his current body was. But what got him was how stingy the system was with merit points. All that work and all he received was 200 points. As he flipped through the system, he was immediately introduced to the lucky draw. Ding! Each lucky draw consumes 50 merit points, and if the lucky draw fails, you would get 1 luck point. He wrote it off as a scam and moved on. Next up was the system store. It had some of everything, but what caught his eye was the avatars. An avatar is one of the strongest skills of a cultivator. When cultivators cultivate to a certain realm, they condense their divine senses into giant avatars. The stronger the cultivator, the stronger their avatar. Basic Taiji was an apprentice rank avatar, and it alone costs 300 merit points. A 2 transformation powered avatar was selling for 1,000 points. The avatar at the very bottom of the list caught his eye. Myriad Supreme had a cost that was so high that the system was refusing to show it. In the contemporary realm of cultivation, even a once formidable villain like Jitian Dao possessed only an 8-leaf 100 Tribulations Insight avatar. Even with the acknowledgement that it was on the verge of advancing to the 9th level, it was still a long way from reaching the exalted state of the 1,000 Realms Whirling avatar. And here was the Myriad Supreme, an avatar that only existed in legends. He wasn't going to dwell on how far away obtaining it was and instead chose to focus on the present. Like a true addict, he wasted no time putting his points into Lady Luck's hands. Ding! The lucky draw begins. Ding! The lucky draw cost 50 merit points. You received a reversal card. Would you like to continue the lucky draw? Lu Zhou had just hit the jackpot. He was expecting the system to continue its trend of being a stingy bastard. Instead of a simple thank you, please try again, he had received something that was truly formidable. Seeing as how the system just handed him a windfall, he had no reason to feed the lucky draw. Instead, he chose to hold on to his money until he could buy an avatar that would improve his cultivation. The system was going to allow him to skip all of the cultivation bottlenecks. Normally, he would have to break through the body tempering realm into the mystic enlightening realm before being able to use an apprentice rank avatar. Such a simple thing was going to be an ultimate cheat. Quest update. Side quest number 3. Taming Zhu Honggong in progress. Side quest number 4. Evil must be completely eradicated. Change the situation. Lu Zhou wasn't trying to dig his own grave. If he went up against his 8th disciple at his current cultivation level, that's exactly what would happen. He had to be strategic in times like this. He needed to remain calm and make the wise decision. Going forward, he would need to keep his distance from his 3 disciples. The risk of them discovering his secrets was just too great. Only Little Nine was trustworthy enough to be kept close at hand. Her cultivation base is in the Divine Court realm, her loyalty is the highest. And she was the youngest, so she was the most suitable disciple to keep beside him. He could also teach her the truth of life, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Lu Zhou figured there was no better time than now to use his new reversal card. But a change of location was indeed needed, seeing as how he wasn't trying to blow the top off the mountainside. His pagoda would make a more suitable venue. Zhu Honggong, the evil king, rested upon his throne at the headquarters of the Tiger Ridge Gang. As the news of the world reached his ears, he sent his men on a mission to investigate the battle at the Mountain of Enlightenment. They chose to wisely watch from afar, as the scene eventually erupted into an intense battle that caused thousands of cultivators to flee for their lives. Every cultivator they managed to question gave the same story, each witnessed an avatar with their own eyes. The evil king needed to know specifics, exactly what kind of avatar. The avatar was 100 feet tall and 20 feet wide, surrounded by golden light, and was sitting atop an 8-leaf golden lotus. Shit. It couldn't be anyone other than his master. He had no idea how the old villain had managed such a feat, but the evil king knew danger when he heard it. But as fear and panic coursed through his body, he had no idea what he could do to avoid it. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you support the original creators. Supporting their work will allow us to continue to get amazing chapters in the series. And as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.